The fog rolled thick over the East River, swallowing the city's lights into a gray shroud. A low ship's horn bellowed in the distance, echoing like a warning through the night air. Along Pier 17, the slick planks glistened with drizzle and oil. A man's lifeless body lay sprawled beside a cargo crate, one gloved hand dangling toward the water as if still reaching for salvation. The sharp scent of blood mingled with brine and diesel. Detective Hercule Poirot, newly arrived from Europe aboard the SS Normandy, stood at the edge of the scene, immaculate in his gray overcoat and bowler hat, his famous mustache untouched by the damp air. His eyes, however, were already at work, keen, calculating. Someone had killed Charles Van Dorn, shipping magnate. And, in this city of towering ambition, lies were as plentiful as fog. Poirot knew the murderer was close. Very close. Chapter 1. The Body on the Pier. The fog rolled in from the East River like a living thing, coiling around lampposts and slithering down the slick timbers of the wharf. It was the sort of fog that muffled footsteps, swallowed cries, and blurred the line between what was real and what one only imagined. Ships moored nearby loomed as black hulks, their rigging creaking like skeletal joints, their horns echoing across the water with mournful, bovine groans. Hercule Poirot stood perfectly still at the edge of Pier 17, a small, immaculate silhouette in a world gone soft and gray. His overcoat was of the finest wool, cut to European exactness, and his shoes gleamed like patent mirrors despite the damp boards beneath them. Even his famous mustache, waxed, curled, and symmetrical, was untouched by the drizzle. He looked to the uniformed policeman bustling about the scene like a gentleman utterly unsuited for New York's grimy waterfront. Yet in his eyes burned a sharp light, as if behind them a machine of small silver case from his pocket and withdrew a pair of pince-nez, which he perched on his nose. With gloved fingers he examined the victim without disturbing the scene. "Name's Charles Van Dorn," O'Rourke said, flipping open a small notebook. "Age 58, big player in shipping, had his fingers in half the docks on the East River. He was scheduled to give testimony about smuggling next month. Guess somebody didn't want him talking." "Or perhaps," murmured Poirot, "he intended to speak of something else, and that too was not desired." He leaned closer to the body, his nostrils twitching at the mingled scents of salt, oil, and blood. "A single stab wound, yes? Rather neat. The weapon?" "Gone." O'Rourke shrugged. "Could be anything from a sailor's knife to an ice pick. We'll know more after the autopsy." Poirot's eyes had already moved on. Around the body, in the faint glow of the lanterns, he saw footprints, dozens of them. Dock workers, policemen, passers-by. But beneath the chaos, a single set stood out. Small, narrow, pointed at the toes. A woman's shoes, perhaps. He reached toward the victim's right hand. "Regardez," he said. "The ring." On the dead man's finger gleamed a heavy gold signet ring, the sort favored by old families. Poirot held his magnifier over it. The crest was intricate, a rearing lion flanked by 2 fleurs-de-lis, and beneath it the initial M. "Does he have an M in his name?" Poirot asked. "Nope, just Charles Van Dorn. Middle name Harold, far as I know." Poirot's mustache twitched thoughtfully. "Then this ring, it is not his." O'Rourke frowned. Could have been a gift. Perhaps, Poirot murmured. But also, perhaps, a message. He turned next to the dead man's coat pocket. The police had already inventoried its contents: wallet, pen, pocket watch, and a folded scrap of paper. Poirot took the paper with a gloved hand, smoothing it on his knee. It read, in hurried scrawl, Pier 9, midnight. Yet the body was on Pier 7. Poirot reached with his cane, hooking it deftly and lifting it up. It was a thread, silk, expensive, torn from a garment. A lady's cloak, perhaps, Poirot mused. Red. O'Rourke blinked. How can you know that? Poirot smiled faintly. The weave, the dye, the way it has frayed, all tell me so. We Belgians are very particular about textiles. He tucked the thread into a small envelope and slipped it into his pocket. This, mon capitaine, is our first clue. They were interrupted by the approach of a uniformed officer. Captain, we found a witness, the man said. Old dockhand. Says he saw someone on the pier before we got here. Bring him, O'Rourke said. The dockhand was a wiry, weathered man with a cap pulled low. He smelled of salt and whiskey. Didn't see much, he muttered. Fog was thick. Heard a scuffle, like somebody arguing, then a splash. When I came closer, the guy was lying there, dead as stone. Did you see anyone leaving? Poirot asked softly. A shape, maybe, the man said. Could have been a woman, cloak flapping, red, I think. But then she was gone into the mist. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, mon ami. You have been most helpful. The man shuffled away, muttering. Poirot turned back to O'Rourke. So, a red cloak, a rendezvous at Pier 9, a ring that does not belong to the victim. Already the pattern begins. Pattern, O'Rourke snorted. Looks like a mess to me. Poirot gave a small, indulgent smile. Order and method, mon capitaine. Even in chaos, there is always order. One must simply look. He stepped carefully around the body, scanning the crates nearby. One bore a painted mark, M42. Another had its lock broken. He opened it slightly. Inside lay straw, empty except for a faint metallic smell, oil and steel. Weapons? Or merely machinery parts? Poirot closed it again. Your men will examine these crates, yes. Sure. Clever enough to kill, and cunning enough to cover its tracks. But Poirot's little gray cells, as he always said, were not so easily deceived. He turned back to the body one last time. The lantern light cast the dead man's face in stark relief, features slackened in a final, bewildered grimace. What had Van Dorn seen in his last moments? Whose voice had lured him to this deserted pier? What bargain had ended in betrayal and blood? Poirot knelt briefly, murmuring a phrase in French too low for anyone to hear. Then he rose and brushed a speck of dust from his sleeve. Remove the body, he told O'Rourke, but leave the scene untouched otherwise. I shall return at dawn. Where are you going? O'Rourke asked. Poirot's eyes glinted. To speak with those who knew him best. The living, mon capitaine, always tell us more than the dead. He walked away from the pier, his small frame swallowed by the fog, his footsteps soft and deliberate. Behind him the river whispered and the gulls cried, and the city loomed like a giant waiting for its secrets to be pried loose. The game, as always, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Van Dorn Empire. The following morning sunlight pierced the Manhattan skyline like polished brass, reflecting off the windows of skyscrapers and streaking the East River with gold. It was a different city from the one Poirot had left on the pier. Where last night's fog had been gray and secretive, the day was bright, brash, and loud with commerce. Ferries honked, tugboats puffed steam, and Wall Street clerks hurried to their offices with crisp newspapers tucked under their arms. Yet to Poirot the glimmer of daylight did not banish the shadows. It only sharpened their edges. His taxi rolled up to the Van Dorn building on Broad Street, a 25-story tower of pale stone and steel whose facade gleamed like a temple to money. Bronze doors swung open under the polished letters Van Dorn Shipping and Mercantile. Poirot paused a moment before entering, tilting his head back to study the building's Art Deco reliefs. Stylized waves, Poirot stepped into a paneled corridor whose carpet muffled his tread. A brass plaque read, Charles Van Dorn, President. Beyond it stretched a reception room with velvet chairs and a heavy mahogany desk. Behind the desk sat a young woman with smooth chestnut hair pinned in a neat chignon. Her pale face showed the blotchy signs of recent tears. "Miss Evelyn Crane?" Poirot asked gently. She nodded, rising. "Yes, you must be Hercule Poirot. I assist the police in their investigation of Monsieur Van Dorn's death." Her lips trembled. "I can hardly believe it. He was here yesterday, dictating letters, shouting about schedules, as usual. And now—" She broke off, pressing a handkerchief to her mouth. Poirot inclined his head. "The shock, it is most understandable. But if we are to find justice for Monsieur Van Dorn, you must help me to understand him, his habits, his enemies, his fears." Evelyn gestured to the inner office. "You'd better come in." The president's suite was large and commanding, lined with bookshelves and nautical charts. A panoramic window offered a view of the harbor, dotted with freighters like toys in a bathtub. The desk, a massive slab of polished mahogany, bore the scars of decades of decisions. On it stood a silver inkwell, a brass ship's bell, and a framed photograph of a stately woman in pearls. Marguerite Van Dorn. Poirot crossed the room slowly, his eyes grazing each detail. A model of the company's newest vessel, the Manhattan Star, rested in a glass case. On a side table lay several ledgers, their bindings cracked from use. "He liked to keep his own records?" Poirot asked. "Always," Evelyn said. "He didn't trust accountants. Said too many people were on the take." Poirot gave a small, He drew out one of the ledgers and opened it. Columns of figures marched down the page, precise and regular. Only one entry stood out. A thick black line drawn through a shipment listed for Pier 9. Special consignment. The consignee's name had been torn away, leaving a ragged edge. "Someone from his will recently. Was that you?" Her cheeks flushed. "That's a lie." "Perhaps," Poirot said mildly. "We shall see." He moved to the photograph of Marguerite Van Dorn. In it she looked regal, chin lifted, pearls gleaming. "His wife," Poirot murmured. "Do you know her well?" "I've met her at company functions. She's very glamorous," Evelyn said. "But they've been estranged for months. She was spending money faster than he could make it. They argued constantly." Poirot nodded. "So, Madame Van Dorn may have motive of money. And others?" Evelyn perched on the edge of the desk, twisting her handkerchief. "Anthony Russo, the dock foreman at Pier 17. Mr. Van Dorn accused him of theft last month and had him fired. He swore revenge. And there's Victor Lennox, Van Dorn's business rival. Their feud is famous in the papers. Lennox's contracts are failing. Van Dorn underbid him everywhere. Poirot tapped the desk with a finger. 4 names already. Evelyn Crane, Anthony Russo, Marguerite Van Dorn, Victor Lennox. Each with reason, each with opportunity. C'est intéressant. He walked to the window. Below, the harbor glittered, alive with motion. Ships came and went. Cranes swung. Men shouted. Yet through the bustle, Poirot felt a current of menace, as if some unseen tide carried all these players toward a hidden reef. "Tell me, Miss Crane," he said over his shoulder. "Did Monsieur Van Dorn ever mention the initial M?" "M?" she echoed. Poirot turned, holding up the gold signet ring in a small evidence bag. The lion crest gleamed in the sunlight. This was on his finger when he was found. It is not his. Does it mean anything to you? She stared at it, brow furrowing. I've seen that crest before, but I can't place it. Maybe Lennox or Marguerite? I don't know. Poirot's mustache twitched. Perhaps you will recall later. Memory is like a tide. Poirot said softly. Not yet. Rousseau snorted and turned on his heel. Then I'll be seeing you. He slammed the door behind him. Evelyn sagged. He's dangerous. Poirot said nothing. He moved back to the desk and picked up a letter opener, a slender silver blade shaped like a dagger. He weighed it in his hand, then set it down. So many weapons at hand, he murmured. A buzzer sounded on Evelyn's desk. She went to answer it, then turned back pale. Mrs. Van Dorn is here. She insists on seeing the office. Poirot's brows lifted. Already? Très bien. We shall meet her. The outer door swung open. Marguerite Van Dorn swept in like a queen, trailing a perfume of jasmine and cigarette smoke. She wore a cloche hat and a fur-collared coat despite the spring sunshine. Pearls glimmered at her throat, and her gloved hands clutched a crocodile handbag. So, she said coolly, surveying the office, this is where my husband spent his last hours. Poirot stepped forward. Madame Van Dorn, my condolences. She gave a brittle laugh. Don't waste them on me, Mr. Poirot. Charles and I were married in name only. Yet you have come, Poirot said gently. Her eyes flickered. To see what's mine. Or was. Poirot gestured to the photograph on the desk. You were a handsome couple. Handsome, she echoed, but not happy. He cut my allowance, humiliated me in public. He said he'd change his will. I suppose he did. Her smile was sharp as glass. And now the vultures gather. Poirot regarded her quietly. She wore gloves, new, uncreased. Beneath the coat's fur lining, a flicker of red silk showed when she moved. His mind noted it without outward reaction. Did you see him last night, madame? He asked. She tilted her head. I saw him often enough to last me a lifetime. Poirot inclined his head. Merci. When she had swept out again, Evelyn let out a breath. One spider had struck. He intended to find it. Chapter 3. Suspects Assemble. The Van Dorn boardroom was a temple of power. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, glinting off the polished mahogany table that stretched nearly the length of the room. The walls were lined with framed maps of trade routes, lithographs of the company's freighters at sea, and a giant clock ticking with metronomic regularity. Yet despite the opulence, the air was taut with tension. People spoke in murmurs, as though afraid their words would echo too loudly. Poirot had chosen this setting deliberately. Here, among the symbols of Charles Van Doorn's empire, his associates would feel the ghost of the man whose body lay in the morgue. Here, stripped of their private corners, they might reveal what they wished to hide. He stood near the head of the table, a small, dapper figure with hands folded over his cane. Captain O'Rourke leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his uniform lending the proceedings an air of official gravity. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his accent soft but clear. "Thank you for coming. I know your grief is fresh, but we must speak of Monsieur Van Doorn's last hours. Already there are clues, yes, but also contradictions. It is time we examine them together." At the table sat 4 people, each a potential piece on Poirot's chessboard. He had arranged them with care. Marguerite Van Doorn, the widow, placed where the sunlight caught her pearls like a noose of light. Poirot let his gaze pass over them slowly, one by one, reading their postures, their eyes, the small betrayals of nerves. Marguerite broke the silence first. "I fail to see why we are here, Mr. Poirot," she said coolly. "The police can handle this." Poirot inclined his head. "The police, madame, are most efficient in matters of force. But murder? Ah, that is a matter of the little gray cells. And it is the murderer who interests me, not merely his act." Rousseau snorted. "Sounds fancy to me. You trying to pin this on one of us?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Not." Marguerite's eyes flickered, but her chin rose. "I have several cloaks. Red is a fashionable color. You were seen on the pier last night." She gave a little laugh. "Nonsense." Evelyn Crane's voice, tremulous, cut in. "It's true. I saw her. She was following Mr. Van Doorn." Marguerite's head whipped toward her. "You little—" She bit off the words, recovering her composure. "Even if I were there, which I am not admitting, that hardly makes me a murderer." Poirot raised a placating hand. "No, madame, but it does make you a witness." Rousseau shifted in his chair, glancing from one woman to the other. "Looks to me like you two had plenty of reason to want him dead." Evelyn flinched. "I would never." Poirot's voice was soft. "Mademoiselle Crane, perhaps you could tell us why you were on the pier as well." She swallowed hard. I went to warn him about the shipment at Pier 9. He'd found out it was weapons being smuggled. He wanted to expose the buyer. I told him it was too dangerous." "Yet you did not call the police?" Poirot asked gently. "I didn't know who to trust." She twisted her handkerchief. "He didn't either." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And this buyer? Did Mr. Van Doorn name him?" "No, just M. That's all he said." Poirot let the word hang in the air like a specter. M. Victor Lennox shifted his cane. "So your theory is what exactly? That one of us, perhaps me, arranged to meet Van Doorn at Pier 9, then lured him to Pier 17 and killed him?" Poirot regarded him calmly. "Do you wear a signet ring, monsieur?" Lennox's jaw tightened. "Of course. My family crest. Everyone knows it. But I lost mine months ago." "Lost?" Poirot repeated softly. "How convenient." "I don't have to listen to this," Lennox said sharply. Poirot's gaze flicked to Rousseau. "And you, Monsieur Rousseau?" Ship's horn bellowed. Poirot turned back to the table. Tell me, who knew of the Pier 9 shipment? No one answered. Ah, Poirot said softly. Then we must seek elsewhere. He glanced at O'Rourke. Captain, perhaps you would show our guests the evidence we have so far. O'Rourke stepped forward, placing 3 envelopes on the table. The torn note, the signet ring, the scrap of red silk. Each person stared at the objects as though they might bite. Marguerite's lips parted, then closed. Lennox shifted. Rousseau scowled. Evelyn's hands trembled. Poirot watched them all, eyes half-lidded. In truth, he did not expect confessions. He expected reactions, however slight. A twitch, a glance, a tightening of the mouth. He noted every one. Finally, he said, "Thank you for your time. I will not detain you further today. But remember, murder is not so easily hidden. The truth, it floats like oil on water." He inclined his head. "That is all for now." The suspects began to rise. Marguerite swept out first, her perfume trailing behind her. Lennox followed with a stiff bow, cane clicking on the floor. Rousseau stomped out without a word. Evelyn lingered, eyes wide. "Do you really think one of them?" Poirot touched her arm lightly. "Think, mademoiselle? No. I know. But the proof, that we must still gather." She nodded and hurried after the others. When the door had closed, O'Rourke blew out a breath. "Well, that was a circus. You think one of them cracked?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Cracked? No. But they have shifted, mon cher capitaine, like icebergs in a current. We have only to chart their drift." He turned back to the evidence on the table. The signet ring glinted like a tiny sun. The red silk curled like a serpent. The torn note whispered of an unseen rendezvous. All pieces of a puzzle that would, in time, reveal a face. Poirot placed each item back into its envelope with meticulous care. "Come," he said. The corridor seemed to belong to a much larger man. Captain O'Rourke followed, his uniform damp at the shoulders. "Funny, ain't it?" O'Rourke muttered. "Here we are going through dead men's papers while his body's still on ice." Poirot gave a small shrug. "The dead, mon capitaine, are most patient. It is the living who hurry." He stopped before the heavy oak door of the records room. Inside lay the company ledgers, years of deals, shipments, invoices. Poirot had asked for this access himself. To understand Charles Van Dorn's last days, he wanted to see not his letters or his will, but his business, the paper arteries through which his power flowed. O'Rourke produced the key and swung the door open. The room smelled of paper and dust, the scent of long-buried secrets. Tall iron shelves lined the walls, packed with leather-bound volumes. An iron desk stood at the center, its lamp casting a yellow glow. Poirot stepped inside and closed his umbrella with a snap. "Ah," he murmured. "What a temple of commerce. Each ledger a chapter of a life." "Some life," O'Rourke said, rubbing his hands. "Betcha these books could tell more about Van Dorn than his own wife could." Poirot tilted his head. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they tell only what he wished them to tell. We shall see." He began at the most recent shelf, pulling down a ledger stamped Pier 9, Invoices. The book was heavy, the leather worn. Poirot placed it on the desk, his fingers reverent. He opened it to the last entries. For an hour they worked in silence. Poirot scanned columns of dates, weights, and codes with quick precision. O'Rourke jotted notes, frowning at the ornate penmanship. Outside, the rain drummed on the window like a distant march. At last, Poirot made a small sound. Not triumph exactly, but recognition. He touched a line of ink with his fingertip. Regardez, mon cher. Here is a shipment listed as machinery parts. Destination, Rotterdam. But the weight is too light. The vague destinations. One entry, however, stood out. Consignment number 4827. Textiles. Red silk. Pier 17. Recipient, confidential. M. Poirot stared at the page. Red silk. Pier 17. The night of the murder. Mon Dieu, he whispered. The pattern emerges. What is it? O'Rourke asked. Poirot turned the ledger so he could see. A shipment of red silk scheduled to leave Pier 17 that night. Our murderer uses the very goods as camouflage. A cloak of red silk. The signet ring with M. A shipment under M. All threads of one tapestry. Before O'Rourke could reply, a noise came from the corridor. The faint scrape of a foot, a hinge sighing. Poirot held up a hand. Someone comes, he whispered. The door handle turned slowly. Poirot stepped back into the shadow of a shelf, pulling O'Rourke with him. The lamp on the desk cast a wedge of light. Beyond it, the door opened a crack. A figure slipped inside, small, quick, wrapped in a dark coat. The face was hidden under a brim. The figure went straight to the desk, glancing around once. Then it seized the ledger Poirot had been reading. Poirot moved like a cat. "Halt!" he cried. The intruder gasped and bolted. Poirot lunged, but the figure darted between shelves, knocking books to the floor. O'Rourke gave chase, his boots thudding. "Stop! Police!" he bellowed. But the intruder was fast. By the time they reached the door, the corridor beyond was empty except for a drifting scrap of paper. The stairwell echoed with retreating steps. O'Rourke swore and pounded the banister. "Slippery little!" Poirot bent and picked up the fallen scrap. It was a torn corner of an invoice stamped with the Van Dorn crest. On it, in red ink, the letter M. He straightened, his expression grave. "We are close, mon capitaine. Too close. Someone fears what we will find." Walked down toward Pier 17. The air smelling of brine and tar. Lanterns burned dimly along the dock. Crates stood stacked like silent sentries. Poirot moved slowly, examining the planks where Van Dorn's body had been found. "It was here," he murmured. "The blood, the footprints, the signet ring. But no weapon was ever recovered." O'Rourke scanned the dark water. Could have been tossed overboard. Perhaps. Or perhaps it is still here. Poirot knelt, running his gloved fingers along a crack in the planking. Something glinted. He drew it out. A thin shard of metal, curved, with a fleck of red silk attached. He held it up. "Regardez. A blade, broken. The silk. From the same shipment, I think." O'Rourke took it carefully. "This could be it. The murder weapon." "Part of it," Poirot said. "Enough to prove a link between the shipment and the crime." A sound came from the far end of the pier. A soft splash, a crate shifting. Poirot straightened. "We are not alone." They moved toward the noise, but the pier was empty. Only the lapping water and a gull's cry. Yet Poirot felt eyes watching from the darkness. At last he said, "Come, mon ami. We have enough for tonight. Tomorrow we question them again." With this, he touched the shard of blade. "Now we shall see whose mask slips." Marguerite Van Dorn received them in her drawing room dressed in black chiffon. The curtains were drawn, the scent of lilies heavy. She looked pale but composed. "I trust you are making progress, Mr. Poirot," she said coolly. Poirot bowed. "Progress, yes. Last night someone attempted to steal a ledger from the shipping office. Someone who feared what it contained." Her eyes flickered. "And you think it was me?" "I think," Poirot said gently, "that you know more than you have said. Your husband was about darted." "I don't know anything about it." Poirot studied her. "No, perhaps not. But you know someone who does." Poirot sat at his desk, the ledgers spread before him like a battlefield map. He placed small colored pins into a chart, red for silk shipments, blue for weapons, gold for known associates of M. A pattern emerged, a triangle of routes between New York, Rotterdam, and Buenos Aires, all marked with the mysterious initial. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Who are you, M? A buyer? A smuggler? A name or merely a mask?" He thought of Victor Lennox's missing signet ring, of Marguerite's stolen cloak, of Evelyn's stolen keys. He thought of Rousseau's late-night alibi. One by one, the pieces slid into place. At last he rose, his eyes bright. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we close the circle. Tomorrow we reveal M." Outside, the rain began again, soft as footfalls. Chapter 5. The Trap at Pier 17. The fog had rolled in thick over the East River, wrapping the piers in a gauze of gray. Lanterns glowed like blurred halos, and the low toll of a ship's bell drifted through the mist. It was a night for secrets, and Hercule Poirot had chosen it with care. He stood at the edge of Pier 17, his derby hat tilted against the damp air, his patent leather shoes immaculate despite the puddles. Captain O'Rourke was a few paces behind, smoking a pipe to calm his nerves. "You're sure about this, Poirot?" the captain asked. "Feels like we're walking into a lion's den." Poirot's mustache twitched. "It is not the lion who should be feared, mon capitaine, but the mouse who carries a match. Tonight we let the mouse strike, and then we catch it." He looked around the pier, noting each detail as though setting a stage. The crates stacked too high, the coiled ropes glistening with moisture. The narrow gangway leading to the Van Dorn freighter Astoria, which sat moored and silent. Above them, gulls wheeled invisibly in the mist. This was where Charles Van Dorn had died. This was where the net would close. Poirot had arranged the evening carefully. Each of the 4 key suspects had received an invitation in Van Dorn's own handwriting, copied by Evelyn Crane under Poirot's instruction. The note read, "Meet me at Pier 17 tonight at 10. We must settle the matter of M once and for all." Poirot had also left a whisper with each suspect, a hint that the police were closing in, that Van Dorn's killer would be exposed at the pier. If one of them was truly desperate, they would come armed. perhaps to silence a witness or retrieve evidence. Evelyn herself was waiting inside the Astoria's cabin, pale but determined. "Are you sure this will work?" she had asked earlier. "It feels like we're playing with fire." "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot had replied. "But fire, it revealed." Then nervous. "Mr. Poirot," he said, "this is most irregular. I don't appreciate being summoned to a dock at night like some smuggler." Poirot's eyes flickered. "But are you not, monsieur?" Lennox's face hardened. "I'll overlook that for now. What is this about?" "Patience," Poirot murmured. "All shall be revealed." The four of them stood in a loose semicircle, their breaths misting in the cold air. The scene was set. Poirot moved to stand on a crate so that he looked down slightly upon them, his small figure commanding like a magistrate. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we are gathered here not by chance, but by design. One of you is a murderer. One of you lured Charles Van Dorn to this pier and struck him down to protect a secret. Tonight, that secret ends." Marguerite stiffened. Rousseau muttered a curse. Lennox raised an eyebrow. Poirot went on, his voice carrying through the mist. Van Dorn discovered a smuggling operation. Shipments disguised as textiles and machinery, bearing the mark of M. He planned to expose the buyer, the mastermind. That person sent a note to Pier 9 to divert him. But Van Dorn, suspicious, came here instead. Here he found death. He lifted a gloved finger. "And here we shall find the truth." Rousseau spat over the side. "You got a lot of nerve, pal. You calling me a murderer?" Poirot's eyes flicked to him. "Not yet, monsieur, but soon." He produced a small parcel from his coat and opened it, revealing the shard of blade with its scrap of red silk. "This," he said, "was found in a crack of the pier, part of the murder weapon, and of the shipment scheduled that night. A cloak of red silk, a blade hidden in its folds. Clever, yes, but not clever enough." Marguerite gasped. Lennox's jaw tightened. Rousseau shifted his feet. Poirot's gaze moved from one to the other. "Who among you had access to the shipping schedules?" Real mastermind is someone who knew every detail of Van Dorn's business. Someone who could send notes, access ledgers, and erase trails. He turned slowly, his finger rising like an accusing spear. "It is you, Mademoiselle Evelyn Crane." A gasp rippled through the group. From the cabin of the Astoria, Evelyn appeared, her pale face framed by the doorway. "Me?" she whispered. "How dare you?" Poirot stepped down from the crate. "You were Van Dorn's secretary. You typed his letters, managed his shipments, arranged his meetings. You alone knew of the note to Pier 9. You alone could forge his handwriting to summon these people here. You were the spider at the center of the web." Evelyn's eyes darted wildly. "That's ridiculous. He trusted me." "Ah, but did he?" Poirot's voice softened. "Or did you resent him? He threatened to expose your brother, the one arrested in Rotterdam for smuggling. You feared ruin. So you struck first." Evelyn's lips trembled. "No." "You stole Madame Van Dorn's cloak to disguise yourself. You used Monsieur Lennox's lost ring to frame him. You took Monsieur Rousseau's keys to enter the office and steal the ledger. All to protect R.M. Poirot's voice hardened. And you, mademoiselle. R.M. For a heartbeat, only the fog moved. Then Evelyn laughed, a brittle, high sound. You clever little man, she said. But cleverness won't save you. She reached into her cloak and drew a small pistol. Drop it, O'Rourke barked, drawing his own revolver, but Evelyn's hand was steady. Stay back, she hissed. You think you've trapped me. But I've planned for this. I can still disappear. Poirot stood quite still, his hands folded. No, mademoiselle. The game is over. The police are on their way. Even now they surround the pier. Her eyes flickered, uncertain. Throw the gun down, O'Rourke commanded. Instead, Evelyn backed toward the edge of the pier. You don't Mademoiselle. The ledger, the red silk, the stolen cloak, the missing keys. Each clue pointed to you. But it was your fear tonight that confirmed it. She gave a bitter smile. I never wanted to kill him. But my brother, he got in too deep. Van Dorn found out. He said he'd go to the authorities. I begged him not to. He laughed. She shook her head. So I sent the note. I thought I could frighten him. But he came here. He wouldn't listen. Her voice broke. I didn't mean to stab him. It was an accident. Poirot's eyes were grave. Murder is rarely an accident, mademoiselle. It is the end of a chain begun long before. She bowed her head. What happens now? The law, it will take its course. But perhaps, by speaking the truth of the others involved, you may yet earn mercy. She nodded slowly. Poirot rose and turned to the others. Mesdames et messieurs, our play is finished. The murderer is unmasked. I thank you for your patience. Marguerite shivered. I thought it was me they suspected, she whispered. Madame, Poirot said, the innocent always fear more than the guilty. Lennox straightened his coat. Well, Poirot, you've certainly earned your fee. Poirot inclined his head. Justice, monsieur, is its own fee. Rousseau spat into a spittoon. Guess I owe you an apology, pal. Thought you were just another fancy foreigner. Poirot's mustache twitched. I am indeed a fancy foreigner, monsieur, but sometimes it is useful. O'Rourke led Evelyn away, her shoulders slumped. The fog swallowed them as they walked toward the waiting police wagon. Later, Poirot stood alone on the pier, looking out at the dark water. The mist had thinned, and the city's lights glittered like a necklace. Captain O'Rourke returned, wiping his hands. She's on her way downtown. Says she'll name hissed in the hearth. The heavy curtains muffled the noise of the street, turning the room into a private tribunal. It was here 3 nights after the drama on Pier 17 that Hercule Poirot had summoned the principal players of the case. They sat, scattered like chess pieces. Marguerite Van Dorn, her face pale but composed. Victor Lennox, immaculate in a gray suit. Anthony Rousseau, shifting uncomfortably in a chair far too fine for his liking. And Captain O'Rourke, pipe in hand, leaning against the mantel. And at the center, like a judge presiding over a trial, stood Hercule Poirot. He had arranged his notes neatly upon a small side table, but he barely glanced at them. His mind was a perfectly indexed filing cabinet. On a chaise longue near the window sat Evelyn Crane, now in a plain blue dress, her wrists unshackled but flanked by two discreet uniformed officers. She looked drawn, as though years had passed in days. Poirot's mustache gleamed in the firelight. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his Belgian accent soft but precise. "We are assembled for the final act. You have seen the curtain rise upon the crime. You have glimpsed the actors, heard the lines. Now you shall see the play entire." No one spoke. The only sound was the clock ticking on the mantelpiece, marking each second like a judge's gavel. Poirot began to pace slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Let us recall the facts. Charles Van Dorn was found dead on Pier 17, stabbed by a blade hidden within a shipment of red silk. He had been lured there by a note purporting to summon him to Pier 9. This note, as we now know, was written by Mademoiselle Crane, who feared exposure of her brother's smuggling activities. But the crime, mes amis, was not so simple. He turned to Marguerite. "Madame Van Dorn, you suspected your husband of infidelity. You followed him that night but arrived too late. You saw him fall. Is the third thread." Lennox's mouth tightened, but he did not reply. Poirot spread his hands. "Thus, our three suspects are each entangled in the tapestry, but none, at first glance, is the weaver. That left only one person with both knowledge and access, Mademoiselle Evelyn Crane, Van Dorn's secretary." All eyes turned to Evelyn. She met Poirot's gaze steadily, though her hands trembled. "You arranged the note," Poirot continued. "You stole Madame Van Dorn's cloak from the wardrobe at the estate, knowing it would both conceal your figure and later implicate her. You retrieved the lost ring from Van Dorn's desk, where he had kept it as evidence against Lennox. You timed everything so that you would meet Van Dorn at Pier 17, not Pier 9, ensuring no one else would be present." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Poirot's voice softened. "But mademoiselle, what you did not plan was Van Dorn's refusal to be cowed. He mocked you. He threatened you. In the struggle, the blade hidden in the silk cut him. Whether by accident or intention, he fell. You fled, leaving the clues scattered. That is how it happened, n'est-ce pas?" A long silence. Then Evelyn whispered, "Yes." Marguerite made a small sound of shock. Rousseau swore under his breath. Poirot inclined his head. "But that, mes amis, is not the end. For the true mastermind of the smuggling ring remains at large. Mademoiselle Crane acted out of desperation, not greed. She was an instrument, not the conductor. And Charles Van Dorn, in dying, left us a final clue." Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out a small envelope, yellowed from seawater. He held it up like a relic. "This was found in Van Dorn's overcoat lining," he said. "A scrap of paper with only 2 words. Astoria Manifest. At first I thought it referred to the freighter moored at Pier 17. But then I realized. The name of the ship was the Astoria, yes, but the manifest, the shipping list, had the police already have the records. They await only Mademoiselle Crane's sworn statement. The net, monsieur, has closed." Evelyn stared at Lennox, stunned. You used me," she said hoarsely. You promised my brother would be safe. Lennox's lips thinned. Business is business. Poirot's eyes hardened. And murder is murder. You set the stage, monsieur. You fed Van Dorn information through intermediaries, hoping to lure him to a trap. But you underestimated Mademoiselle Crane's desperation. She struck before you could. That is why you tried to flee the country the night after the murder. Lennox's shoulders sagged. Damn you, Poirot. Poirot returned to his table and arranged his notes once more, though he did not need them. Thus, he said, the picture is complete. Van Dorn discovered the smuggling ring. He prepared to expose it. Lennox, fearing ruin, orchestrated a meeting to silence him. Mademoiselle Crane, fearing for her brother, acted first and killed Van Dorn. The cloak, the ring, the blade, all red herrings, all pointing elsewhere. But the truth, mes amis, is like oil upon water. It rises. He turned to Evelyn. Mademoiselle, you have confessed. Now you must give testimony of Monsieur Lennox's role. Only then can justice be done. Tears welled in her eyes. I will, she whispered. Marguerite drew herself up. And my husband? His name, will it be cleared? Poirot's gaze softened. Madame, his reputation will be restored. He died not as a villain, but as a man who sought to do right. That at least you may take comfort in. Rousseau exhaled deeply. Guess that's it then. Case closed. Poirot shook his head. No, monsieur. Cases are never closed. They leave ripples. But the law will handle the rest. Lennox. Victor Lennox, one said formally. You are under arrest on charges of conspiracy to smuggle contraband and complicity in the murder of Charles Van Dorn. Lennox's face drained of color. He looked at Poirot one last time, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. I should have killed you too, he muttered. Poirot's mustache bristled. Many have tried, monsieur. None have succeeded. They led Lennox out. Evelyn watched him go with a mixture of anger and relief. Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle Crane, you must accompany them also. But your cooperation will weigh heavily in your favor. The court may show mercy. She rose, unsteady. I'll tell them everything, she whispered. Marguerite watched, silent, as the two officers escorted Evelyn away. The great door closed behind them with a heavy thud. Rousseau stood and stretched. Well, guess I'm free to go. Can't say I'll miss this place. He looked at Poirot. Thanks, pal. You saved my hide. Poirot gave a small bow. It is always preferable to save than to accuse wrongly. Marguerite approached Poirot. Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. I misjudged you. I thought you a meddler. But you have given me back my husband's honor. For that, I thank you. Poirot took her hand gently. Madame, cherish the truth. It is all we ever truly possess. She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes, and left the room. O'Rourke knocked out his pipe on the mantel. You ever think of joining the NYPD, Poirot? Poirot smiled faintly. Alas, mon ami, I am too fond of my comforts. And your police coffee. It is terrible. O'Rourke chuckled. Fair enough. They were alone now, just the two of them and the crackling fire. Poirot looked into the flames. The case is solved, he murmured. Café Mistral, far from the courtrooms and headlines. A silver teapot steamed gently before him. His gloved fingers cradled the delicate porcelain cup. Outside, rain streaked the window like melted glass. It should have been a moment of peace. But Poirot's eyes were not serene. They were watchful, troubled, as though his little gray cells were still at work. Captain O'Rourke arrived late, shaking raindrops from his coat. You pick the fanciest joints, Poirot, he said, dropping into the chair opposite. Coffee's black as tar, pastries cost a week's pay. But I can't say no. Poirot's mustache twitched faintly. A man who solves crimes, mon capitaine, must also cultivate the palate. Otherwise he becomes like the crimes themselves, bitter. O'Rourke grinned and ordered coffee. So, court arraignments are done. Lennox is holding up in the Tombs till trial. Evelyn Crane's singing like a canary. We're raiding warehouses tonight. By tomorrow, the whole ring'll be smashed. Ah, Poirot said softly. You speak as though the octopus can be slain by cutting one tentacle. O'Rourke frowned. You think there's more? Poirot stirred his tea thoughtfully. Always, mon ami. There is the visible hand and the invisible. Lennox was clever but not omnipotent. Someone else coordinated the customs forgeries. Someone else arranged the shipments from Europe. Someone who has not yet been named. The captain blew out a breath. Hell of a thought. Any suspects? Poirot tilted his head. I have, as you say, a shadow. The bell over the cafe door jingled. Marguerite Van Dorn entered, wrapped in a dark coat, her veil drawn. She crossed the room swiftly as though pursued by whispers. Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice low. May I sit? Poirot rose and bowed slightly. But of course, madame. She slid into the seat beside O'Rourke. Up close she looked older than her years, her skin pale. Means, Poirot said, that someone believes you know more than you think. Perhaps you do. That afternoon, Poirot visited the women's holding cell at the Tombs. Evelyn Crane sat on a narrow cot, her face haggard but composed. You came, she said. I thought you were finished with me. Poirot pulled up a chair. But non, mademoiselle, we are far from finished. Tell me, who was the true head of this ring? I told the police everything, she said wearily. Lennox handled the money. My brother smuggled the goods. Van Dorn found out. That's all. Poirot's eyes were sharp. And yet, someone threatens Madame Van Dorn. Someone who fears she may reveal a secret. What secret could that be? Evelyn's fingers knotted together. I don't know. Poirot leaned forward. Think, mademoiselle. Van Dorn was investigating. He kept ledgers. He spoke to you. Did he ever mention a name? She hesitated. Once, he said, the Queen will fall. I thought he meant Marguerite. Poirot's mustache bristled. Ah, the Queen. The Queen of Spades. Evelyn's eyes widened. You think? Poirot stood. I think, mademoiselle, that you have given me the final piece. That evening, Poirot walked alone along the East River. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, clinging to the lamps like dirty cotton. Barges moved like ghosts across the water. Somewhere a ship's bell tolled. He was aware of the footsteps behind him long before he saw the shadow. Slow, careful, matching his pace. Poirot did not turn. Instead, he stopped at the railing, gazing down at the black water. It is a dangerous night for walking, mon ami, he said aloud. A figure emerged from the fog. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a peacoat. A cap shaded his eyes. Mr. Poirot, the man said softly. You should have left well enough alone. Poirot's fingers curled on his cane. The leap. Later, in O'Rourke's office, Poirot traced a finger across a map of the East River docks. Look here, he said. Pier 17, Pier 9, Pier 14. All shipments connected to Lennox's company. And who approved them? Daniel Rourke. But who gave him orders? A woman known only as the Queen. O'Rourke frowned. Could be Marguerite. Could be some lady overseas. Poirot shook his head. Marguerite Van Dorn knew nothing. But there is another. Someone close to the customs office. Someone whose symbol is the Queen of Spades. He snapped his fingers. The customs registrar, Mrs. Harriet Quinn. Quinn. Queen. Do you see? O'Rourke's eyebrows shot up. Holy hell. She's been at that office 20 years. Untouchable. Untouchable until now, Poirot said. She coordinated the manifests. She arranged the bribes. She sent Daniel Rourke to silence witnesses. Lennox was merely her financier. She is the true queen. The captain swore softly. We'll need airtight evidence. Poirot's mustache twitched. We shall have it, but we must draw her out. 2 nights later, a private room at the Metropolitan Club served as the stage for Poirot's second trap. At the table sat Harriet Quinn, elegant in a dark silk dress, her hair silver but eyes sharp as a hawk's. Across from her sat Marguerite Van Dorn, pale but resolute. Captain O'Rourke lingered by the door, pretending to be a waiter. Poirot entered last, bowing slightly. Madame Quinn, he said, I thank you for meeting me. I believe we have mutual interests. Her eyes glittered. Do we? Indeed, Poirot said. You are concerned, are you not, about the testimony of Mademoiselle Crane? About the ledgers recovered from Van Dorn's safe? A flicker crossed her face. Finished. There is only one Queen's move left. Surrender. Harriet's hand trembled. Her eyes darted from Marguerite to Poirot to O'Rourke. Then, with a low hiss, she dropped the pistol onto the table. O'Rourke lunged forward and snapped handcuffs on her wrists. Game's over, lady. Poirot exhaled slowly. And the Queen, he said, has fallen. Later that night, Poirot stood once more at the East River, the fog rolling in thick waves. The city behind him glowed with 1,000 lights, each a pinprick in the darkness. O'Rourke joined him, lighting a cigarette. She'll talk. Between her and Lennox and Crane, we'll have enough to bury the whole operation. Poirot nodded. Justice, it moves slowly, but tonight it has taken a great step. The captain gave him a sideways look. You ever get tired of it? The crime, the lies, the danger? Poirot's mustache twitched. Sometimes. But then I remember. Order, it must be restored. Without it, the world is only fog. They stood in silence, listening to the lap of water against the pier. Finally, O'Rourke said, Well, you've done it again. Fancy foreigner saves the day. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but perhaps the day saves me. Without such puzzles, what would I do? Drink bad coffee? O'Rourke chuckled. Come on, let's get you a decent cup. Together they walked away from the river, their figures swallowed by the mist, while behind them the East River flowed on, dark and endless, but a little less shadowed than before. Chapter 8. The Theater of Justice. The snow had begun before dawn, swirling through the canyons of Manhattan like feathers shaken from some invisible pillow. By 9 o'clock, the streets around the criminal court building were clogged with onlookers, reporters, and shutter-happy photographers. Headlines screamed from every paper. The Queen of Spades in court! Poirot to testify in East River murder! Inside, the courthouse was a cathedral of oak and marble, its echoing hallways alive with murmurs, and in the front row of the gallery, immaculate as always, sat Hercule Poirot, hands folded over his cane, his mustache a perfect twin of symmetrical arcs. Myers rose. The people call Captain Patrick O'Rourke. The captain strode to the stand and was sworn in. Myers paced before him. Captain, how did you first become aware of the smuggling operation? O'Rourke told the story briskly. The intercepted manifests, the suspicious cargo at Pier 17, the link to Lennox's company. He described the murder of Cornelius Van Dorn, his voice tightening slightly at the memory of the man sprawled beneath the pier's shadow. And what led you to the defendant? Myers asked. A pattern, O'Rourke said. Every shipment tied to Mrs. Quinn's signature in the customs records. Every forged manifest traced back to her office. And then the threat cards, the Queen of Spades, sent to witnesses. He held up one of the cards sealed in an evidence bag. Gasps rippled through the spectators. The defense attorney, a portly man named Francis Bellamy, rose for cross-examination. Captain O'Rourke, isn't it true that many people at customs have access to those records? True, O'Rourke said evenly. But only one signed them all. Bellamy's mustache twitched. No further questions. The people call Mrs. Marguerite Van Dorn. Marguerite's heels clicked softly as she approached the stand. She looked almost spectral under the high ceiling. Yet her voice, when she spoke, was steady. My husband, she said, was worried. He believed something illegal was happening with shipments through the East River. He kept a journal. He told me he had found the Queen, but not yet her name. Myers showed her the threatening card. Do you recognize this? Yes. It was left in my husband's study after his death. Her hands trembled. Then another was delivered to me. It said if I spoke, I would die next. Bellamy rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Van Dorn, isn't it true your husband's finances were entangled? Dorn. How he had examined the crime scene beneath the pier. How the pattern of the cards and ledgers revealed a hidden mastermind. The true head of the smuggling ring. he concluded, was not Mr. Lennox, but Madame Harriet Quinn. She used her position at customs to orchestrate the entire enterprise. He described the second trap at the Metropolitan Club, the confrontation, the pistol, and her surrender. Bellamy rose. Mr. Poirot, you are not an American citizen, correct? That is so. And you are not a sworn officer of the law. Also correct. Then your conclusions are merely your opinion. Poirot's mustache bristled. Non, monsieur. My conclusions are facts deduced from evidence. Whether this court accepts them as such, eh bien, that is your affair. A ripple of laughter moved through the gallery before Justice Walden banged his gavel again. Bellamy called no witnesses of substance, but tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's chain of evidence. He suggested the cards could have been planted, the manifests forged by a rival, the pistol at the Metropolitan Club a prop. Harriet Quinn sat immobile through it all, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on Poirot with something between hatred and admiration. During a recess, Poirot lingered in the hallway, gazing out at the falling snow. Marguerite approached. "Do you think they'll convict her?" she whispered. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "If the jury has the brains of sparrows, yes. But one must never underestimate a queen's power, even in checkmate." The next day's session brought a surprise. Bellamy called Evelyn Crane as a defense witness. The courtroom buzzed. Evelyn entered, her prison dress hidden beneath a borrowed coat, her eyes downcast. Bellamy smiled. "Miss Crane, did Mrs. Quinn ever order you to commit any crime?" "No," Evelyn said faintly. "I never met her until the arrest." "Then how do you know she was involved?" I don't," Evelyn stammered. Bellamy, "Kill me if I testified." "Who threatened you?" Myers demanded. Evelyn's eyes darted to Harriet Quinn. Her people. She runs everything." Myers nodded grimly. No further questions. Bellamy slumped back into his seat. In his closing, Myers painted Harriet Quinn as a spider at the center of a vast web, her cards a signature of power and fear. "She thought she was untouchable," he said. "But the law reaches even queens." Bellamy tried to cast her as a scapegoat for Lennox and Crane, but his voice lacked conviction. The cards in Evelyn's cell had destroyed his credibility. Harriet Quinn herself never testified. She sat like a marble statue, her expression unreadable. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Snow piled against the courthouse windows, muting the city's roar. Reporters huddled in the hallways, smoking and speculating. Poirot sat in a quiet alcove, eyes closed as if napping. At last the bell rang. The courtroom filled again, a living tide of coats and hats and whispers. "Madam Forewoman," Justice Walden said, as the jury reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman said, her voice steady. "On the charge of murder in the first degree?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to smuggle contraband?" "Guilty." Murmurs, then applause. Justice Walden banged his gavel. "Order! I will have order in my court." Harriet Quinn did not flinch. She rose when the bailiffs approached, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. For the first time she looked directly at Poirot. "You're very clever," she said softly. "But you haven't won. There are always other queens." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps. But not today, madame. They led her away. Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs exploded. Headlines flew to the presses. The crowd chanted Poirot's name, though he brushed past them with a small smile, declining comment. Marguerite Van Dorn emerged behind him, her veil hiding her face. "It's over," she whispered. Poirot offered his arm. Headlines had burned across the front pages like meteors, then faded into the back columns as new scandals claimed the city's appetite. Harriet Quinn was on her way to Sing Sing. Lennox had pled guilty to smuggling. Evelyn Crane awaited sentencing. The Queen of Spades had fallen. Poirot knew a fallen queen leaves ripples on the board. It was a week after the verdict when he returned to the East River Pier where Cornelius Van Dorn had died. The winter sun hung low, cold and pale, glinting off the black water. Ice clung to the pilings like white barnacles. The wind off the river smelled of salt and diesel. Poirot stood alone, gloved hands resting lightly on his cane. His silhouette was a dark pin against the bright frost. He closed his eyes. In his mind, the scene replayed. Van Dorn's lifeless body on the planks, the fog rolling like curtains across the water, the faint scrape of footsteps in the dark. "Mon pauvre Van Dorn," Poirot murmured. "You sought justice, and justice has been served, but at a cost." That evening, Poirot dined at the Waldorf with Captain O'Rourke. The great dining room glittered with chandeliers and silver. Tuxedoed waiters glided between tables like chessmen. A string quartet played something lilting from Vienna. O'Rourke lifted his glass. "To the end of the case." Poirot clinked it gently. "To the end, yes, but not perhaps to the end of all things." The captain chuckled. "You and your riddles. Quinn's locked up, Lennox too. Crane'll be in prison by spring. What's left?" Poirot's eyes were thoughtful. The network was vast. Quinn was the head, yes, but she had lieutenants, financiers, dockmasters, men with knives. They will scatter now, like rats. But one wonders, will they seek revenge? O'Rourke waved a hand. "We'll keep an eye out. You're safe enough." "Safe?" Poirot, "The queen, but the pawn who survives." Marguerite shivered. "You sound as though you expect something to happen." Poirot smiled faintly. "I expect nothing, but I am prepared for anything." 2 days later, a letter arrived at Poirot's suite. It was written in a fine, slanted hand on heavy cream paper. "Monsieur Poirot, the Queen may have fallen, but the game is not over. We will meet again. On my board, not yours." Poirot studied the signature. Only a single letter, C. He turned the envelope over. No return address. O'Rourke frowned when shown the note. "See? Could be anyone. Could be Crane, though she is in custody," Poirot mused. "Could be a confederate. Could be merely a bluff." He slipped the letter into his wallet. "Still, it interests me. The Queen may have fallen, yes, but the chessboard has many pieces." That afternoon, Poirot walked through Central Park. The snow was patchy now, the grass showing through like dark stitches. Children sledded down a small hill, couples strolled arm in arm. The city's heartbeat thumped beyond the trees. He paused on a footbridge overlooking the frozen lake. In the glassy surface he saw his reflection, small and neat, framed by iron railings. A figure approached from behind. A tall man in a dark coat, hands in pockets. Poirot turned slightly. "You follow me, mon ami?" The man hesitated, then nodded. "A message," he said quietly, "from someone who admires your work." "Ah," Poirot's eyebrow lifted. "And what is the message?" The man glanced around. "Stop digging. That's all." Poirot's smile was thin. "But I dig nothing. I only walk." The man slipped a folded card into Poirot's hand and walked off without another word. Poirot opened it. Inside was a playing card, the Knight of Spades. Nothing else. He slipped it into his pocket beside the Queen of Clubs. "So," he murmured, "the game continues." That evening, Poirot sat at his writing desk, a single lamp illuminating his papers. He opened his notebook and wrote, "Move." "She's dangerous," O'Rourke said. "More dangerous now. You should get out of town." Poirot closed the door gently. "And leave the game unfinished? Non, mon capitaine. That is not my way." 2 nights later, Poirot set his own board. He wrote a note to Marguerite Van Dorn, ostensibly inviting her for tea, but delivered it through an intermediary he knew Harriet Quinn still had. Then he waited. At 8 o'clock a knock sounded at his suite door. Poirot opened it, and there stood Harriet Quinn herself, cloaked in black, eyes glittering like cut glass. "You're clever," she said, "but you should have left well enough alone." Poirot stepped aside. "Come in, madame." She entered. The door clicked shut. "You've cost me everything," she said softly. "But I still have one piece left to play." Poirot's gaze flicked to her hands. "A pistol, perhaps, or a knife?" She smiled faintly. "Neither." From her bag she withdrew a small vial. "You and I will drink," she said, "and the game ends here." Poirot's mustache twitched. "You propose a duel of poisons? How medieval." "You won't call the police," she said. "You're too proud. And if you do, you'll never know who C is." Poirot tilted his head. "Ah, so there is a C." She stepped closer, the vial glinting. "One sip, each of us. The winner keeps the secret." A click sounded behind her. "Drop it," growled Captain O'Rourke, stepping from the adjoining room with his revolver drawn. Harriet froze. Poirot smiled gently. "Forgive me, madame. The little gray cells anticipated your move." 2 plainclothes officers entered and took her arms. She did not struggle this time. Her eyes met Poirot's. "You may win today," she said softly. "But the board is bigger than you think." They led her out. When the door closed, O'Rourke exhaled. "That was too close." Poirot adjusted his tie. He murmured. "For now." He straightened his coat, turned, and walked back toward the city. Somewhere behind him, the water closed over the cards, carrying them away. Checkmate at dawn. The city was waking. Outside Poirot's window, the skyline glowed pale rose against the winter sky, the towers and smokestacks like black chess pieces on a board of mist. The previous night had been long. Harriet Quinn taken in chains to a secure cell, the last of her network rounded up by O'Rourke's men. The newspapers were already calling Poirot the Belgian Sphinx of the East River murders. But Poirot sat quietly at the breakfast table, sipping his coffee. He looked tired, but his eyes were bright. On the linen lay an envelope. It had been slipped under his door at dawn. No stamp, no postmark, just his name in a bold, looping hand. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single playing card, the King of Spades. On the back, in neat ink, was written, "Checkmate." Poirot stared at it for a long time. Then he slipped the card into his vest pocket and rang for the bellboy. An hour later, Poirot and Captain O'Rourke stood on the East River Pier once again. A gray freighter was being loaded with cargo, wooden crates stacked like dominoes. Stevedores moved briskly, their breath misting in the cold air. "You sure about this?" O'Rourke muttered. "It could be a trap." Poirot's mustache twitched. "But of course, mon capitaine. A trap for which one prepares is merely a stage." He scanned the dock. Everything looked ordinary, yet a faint prickle stirred in his mind. Too ordinary. The freighter's name was Rex Imperator, Latin for King Emperor. The King of Spades. Poirot adjusted his gloves. "We must be precise, like surgeons," he murmured. "One incision. The truth comes out." They boarded the freighter under pretext of a customs inspection. The captain, a lean man with a waxed beard, greeted them stiffly. "All in order, gentlemen. We're bound for Lisbon tonight." "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his British accent crisp. At last. O'Rourke's hand went to his revolver. "You're under arrest, Kavanaugh." The ambassador smiled faintly. "For what, Captain? I am but a humble diplomat." Poirot stepped forward. "No, monsieur. You are the King of Spades. It was you who built the smuggling empire. Harriet Quinn was merely your queen." Kavanaugh leaned back. "You have no proof." Poirot tapped the desk. "The ledgers, the coded transfers, the ships under false names, and this." He drew from his pocket the playing cards he had collected. "A trail of breadcrumbs left for me. By you." The ambassador raised an eyebrow. "By me?" "Mais oui," Poirot said softly. "Who else could have known my movements, my invitations? Who else had access to both high society and the docks? You cultivated the game as a diversion. Even the letter, 'We will meet again on my board, not yours,' was your flourish." Kavanaugh chuckled. "Bravo, you are indeed clever." And yet, he reached into his coat and produced a small, elegant pistol. Cleverness has limits. O'Rourke drew his revolver, but Kavanaugh shook his head. "If you shoot me, this ship will never leave port. If I shoot you, Poirot, the world loses its greatest detective. But my network lives." Poirot looked at him calmly. "And yet you invited me here, did you not? Because you are a man who enjoys his own theater." Kavanaugh smiled slightly. "Perhaps." From behind a stack of crates came the unmistakable sound of boots. Men in dark coats appeared, revolvers raised, federal marshals. They surrounded the cabin. Kavanaugh's eyes flickered. "You," Poirot inclined his head. "When one receives a King of Spades at dawn, one prepares accordingly. I came to play your final move, monsieur, but with my pieces in place." The ambassador's pistol wavered. "You won't take me alive." O'Rourke stepped forward. "Put it down." Kavanaugh glanced at Poirot. "Tell me, detective, do you think you've really won? Queens and kings are nothing of the little gray cells." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the King of Spades. He had kept it, though the other cards he had cast into the river. He looked at it for a long time, then slipped it back. The next day Marguerite Van Dorn came to bid farewell. She wore a traveling coat and a small hat, her eyes bright with a new resolve. "I sail for Europe tonight," she said. "I wanted to thank you again." Poirot bowed slightly. You have a strong spirit, madame. In Europe you will find a new life. She hesitated. Is it truly over? Poirot smiled gently. The king is captured, the queen imprisoned. The pawns will scatter. For now, yes, it is over. Her eyes softened. Goodbye, Monsieur Poirot. Au revoir, madame, he said. She left, and the door closed softly behind her. That evening, Poirot took a final walk along the East River Pier. The rain fell in fine needles, hissing on the water. The city's neon lights smeared in the wet pavement. He paused where Van Dorn had died. The boards were slick now, the chalk marks long gone. He looked out over the black water. Justice, he murmured. Always imperfect, but necessary. A ferry horn sounded in the distance. Poirot turned his collar up and began to walk back toward the street. As he reached the corner, a small boy ran up, soaked to the skin. Mr. Poirot, the boy gasped. A lady give me this to give to you. He handed Poirot a folded paper and darted off into the rain. Poirot opened it. Inside was a playing card. The pawn of spades. On the back was written, The board is bigger than you think. Poirot stared at it. Then slowly a smile curved his lips. Ah, he murmured. A pawn becomes a queen. He slipped the card into his pocket beside the king of spades. The rain fell harder, drumming on his hat. He straightened, squared his shoulders,